Hare Krishna. So today is Bhagavad Gita. Today is the auspicious day of Bhagavad Gita's advent of Bhagavad Gita. In other words, today is the day when Lord Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Today we recognize this day as Gita Jayanti. So let's try to briefly go through what Bhagavad Gita is about, and we can hear the glorification of the chapters and the verses as well. So Bhagavad Gita, actually it's a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. Originally this was spoken millions and trillions and billions of years, like by Lord Krishna to sun god Vivaswan and Ikshvaku, the father of mankind. Like that, it was going through the disciplic succession, passing through the disciplic succession. But now, in due course of time, it appeared to be lost. Therefore, now again the same science of Bhagavad Gita, or science of God consciousness or Krishna consciousness, is repeated by Lord Krishna to his devotee Arjuna out of his causeless mercy for the benefit of all humankinds. The Bhagavad Gita opens with blind king Dhritarashtra requesting his secretary Sanjay to narrate the battle between his sons, the Kauravas, and their cousins, the Pandavas. Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, out of affection for his devotees, the Pandavas, Prince Arjuna, has agreed to drive his chariot personally. As Arjuna takes up his bow and arrows or prepares to fight, he sees the son of Dhritarashtra drawn in military array and requested infallible Krishna to draw his chariot between the two fighting forces. There in the midst of the both armies, Arjuna's mind reels as he foresees the imminent death of his teachers, relatives, and friends. He throws down his bow and arrows and decided not to fight. And in chapter 1 and in the beginning of chapter 2, Arjuna presents his argument for refusing to fight. Basically, he fears the sinful reaction of killing. But after Arjuna surrenders to the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, and requests the Lord to instruct him, the Lord begins countering Arjuna's objections. First, Krishna analytically explains that fighting in his service is transcendental and will bring no sinful reaction. Krishna also explains the Vedas' purpose as to gradually elevate soul to Krishna consciousness. Krishna thus encourages Arjuna to remain fixed in his service, fight, and ignore his mind's desires. As Krishna's explanation why Arjuna should fight were only a summary, and since Krishna glorifies both Buddhi Yoga, intelligence used in spiritual advancement of knowledge, in chapter 2 verse 45 and chapter 2 verse 49 to 50, and karma, which is work, chapter 2, again, verse 47 and 48, and on verse chapter 2, verse 50, Arjuna becomes confused and wishes to use Krishna's instruction to perform Buddhi Yoga as an excuse to retire the battlefield for a life of contemplation. Arjuna therefore opens chapter 3 asking Krishna why he is encouraging fighting if intelligence is better than fruity work. Krishna then explains Karma Yoga. Reactions, free devotional work, and clears up Arjuna's mistaken idea that all work is fruitive and leads to bondage. Krishna explains that Arjuna should fight for avoiding sinful reactions through devotional work is better than attempting to escape reaction through renouncing work. Krishna also instructs Arjuna to fight, to set the proper example of duty. Krishna therefore tells Arjuna to fight, but with knowledge and detachment. In chapter 3, verse number 29 and 30, without falling victims to his own attractions and aversion. Then in answer to Arjuna's question on the cause of a soul's being impelled to improper action or neglect of duty, Krishna names the enemy, lust. He then recommends Arjuna to regulate his senses, become fixed in his pure identity as the servant of Krishna, and thereby avoid lust control. Then with spiritual strength and deliberate intelligence, he should conquer that forceful enemy known as lust, Kama. Since in chapter 3, Krishna has recommended that Arjuna fight in full knowledge of him, verse number 3, chapter 3, verse number 30, the Lord in chapter 4 explains different aspects of transcendental knowledge. First, Krishna explains attaining knowledge through the disciplic succession. Then after successfully explaining his appearance and then his mission, the Lord explains his devotional service as the goal of. Krishna had already referred to the importance of performing yajna, sacrifice, in chapter 3, verse number 9. Krishna next explains the soul's relationship with him as eternal, his part and parcel, which one must approach a bona fide spiritual master to learn. Chapter 4 ends with Krishna's glorifying transcendental knowledge and requesting Arjuna to arm himself with this knowledge which burns all sinful reactions to ashes and fight. After Arjuna has been impressed with the importance of both work, which acquires activity, and seeking knowledge, which tends to be inactive, Arjuna is perplexed. His determination is confused, and he sees fighting and knowledge as contradiction. Therefore, Arjuna opens chapter 5 by asking Krishna to definitely definitively explain whether the renunciation of work, speculation, sankhya, jnana, inaction in knowledge, or work in devotion is superior. Krishna answers that one by one who detached from his work's result is the one who is truly renounced. Such a person knows that while the body acts, he, the soul, actually does nothing. Arjuna should therefore do his duty steadily, act for the satisfaction of Krishna. Impartially viewing the external world, he should reside in his body, aloof from the bodily activities. By fixing his consciousness on the Supreme and knowing that Krishna is the true enjoyer, the goal of sacrifice and austerity, and the Lord of all planets, he, the pure soul, will find true peace beyond this material world. In the first 5 chapters, Krishna has explained Buddhi Yoga. Working with Krishna consciousness, focused on Krishna without fruitive desires. The Lord has also explained Sankhya Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga to obtain liberation and as stepping stone to Krishna consciousness. Now, at the end of the 5th chapter, verse 27 and 28, and continuing on to the 6th chapter, wherein Krishna explains practical points for a practitioner. Krishna explains Dhyana Yoga, concluding that Dhyana or meditation upon Krishna is meditation's final goal. Krishna begins the 6th chapter by explaining that the neophyte yogi engages in fruitive sitting postures with the advanced yogi. The true sannyasi works without attachment. Such a yogi liberates, not degrades himself by his mind's activities. Carefully controlling his mind and engaging its body and his self in Krishna's service, the yogi strictly practices Dhyana Yoga in a secluded place, fixing his mind on the self and on Krishna. He attains transcendental happiness in the kingdom of God. Arjuna then points out the main difficulty in practicing yoga in controlling the mind. Krishna responded by saying that one can overcome the obstacles of controlling the mind. One can overcome the obstinate mind through constant practice and determination. In responding to Arjuna's about the fate of an unsuccessful yogi, Krishna answers that one unsuccessful in his practice will still take birth in a family of wise transcendentalists and automatically become attracted to yogic principles. Krishna finally states that in the last two verses of the chapter that the yogi is greater than the ascetic, the jnani and the karmis. And the greatest of all yogis is he who always thinks of Krishna and with great faith worships him in loving service. Knowing Krishna's instruction at the end of chapter 6, one should initiate his practice of yoga from the point of concentrating of the mind upon Krishna. Chapter 7 thus opens with the Krishna explaining knowledge of himself and his opulence energies. Thus, Arjuna can fully worship Krishna as described at the end of the chapter 6 and think of him with devotion as he fight. Krishna first explains that as he is the supreme truth, everything in existence is a combination of his material and spiritual energies. He is the active principle within all and is all pervasive through his diverse material and spiritual energies. Because the world's activities are conducted by the three modes of nature which emanates from him, although Krishna is independent and above them, only those who surrender to Krishna can cross beyond these modes to know him. Four kinds of impious souls never surrender to Krishna, while four kinds of pious souls do surrender to Krishna. Krishna also covers himself from the impersonalists who are less intelligent and from those who surrender to the demigods. But those who are truly pious, the undeluded, serve Krishna as the governor of the material manifestation. The demigods and sacrifice can know and understand Krishna at their time of death. Chapter 8 begins by Arjuna asking Krishna about Brahman, karma, the demigods, the material world, and knowing Krishna at the time of death. Krishna first briefly answers Arjuna's first 5 questions and then begins explaining the details how to know Krishna at the time of death. Since one attains what one remembers at the time of death, if one remembers Krishna, one goes to him. Krishna then explains how he can be constantly thought of as the transcendental person who knows everything, the oldest controller, the smallest, the maintainer. Thus, by yoga and remembering Krishna, Krishna explains, one will go to the eternal spiritual world and never again to return to this temporary, miserable, material world. Then after describing the different yogic ways in which one may leave this world, Krishna advises Arjuna not to worry about other paths, either Vedic study, yoga, austere sacrifices, charity, jnana or karma. For the result of these will all be obtained through the performing of devotional service. And in the end, such a yogi in devotion reaches the supreme eternal abode. So, after Krishna explains, or after Krishna answers Arjuna's questions in chapter 8, he continues speaking in chapter 9 the knowledge about himself that he had begun explaining this chapter in chapter 7. Krishna thus prefaces chapter 9 by stating that the knowledge he'll now reveal is most confidential, for it is about his actual position, which only the non-envious and faithful can understand. Krishna continues explaining that although independent and aloof, he pervades, creates and annihilates the entire cosmos through his material energy. Those Mahatmas who knows Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead take shelter of him and serve him as the only enjoyer and the supreme object of worship. Krishna then explains the fortunate position of such devotees. If one worships Krishna, Krishna cares, compensates for his deficiencies and preserves his strengths, and all Krishna asks for is an offering of a leaf, a flower or some water, if it is offered with devotion. Thus his devotees comes to him. Even if a devotee unintentionally commits a horrendous act, he will be rectified, for Krishna promises that his devotee will never perish. In chapter 7 and 9, Krishna has explained knowledge of his energies. In chapter 10, Krishna explains his opulences more specifically and thereby reveals himself the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the source of all. Krishna also tells how his pure devotee knows that he is the unborn Supreme Lord, the source of all sages, the source of the material and spiritual world, and the source of all qualities and attitudes. Thus, pure and wise devotee worship Krishna, converse about him, and with thought dwelling in him, undeluded and free from sin, engages in his service. Out of compassion, Krishna within their hearts destroys any remaining ignorances. After hearing of Krishna's opulences, Arjuna confirms Krishna as the Supreme Lord by quoting authorities, explains that only Krishna can truly know himself. Krishna then tells of his divine manifestation within this world as the Super Soul, the ocean, the Himalayas, which merely indicates his limitless opulences, for a single fragment of Krishna's energy pervades and supports their entire universe. Although acknowledging that Krishna in the two-arm form that he now sees before him is supreme, still requests Krishna to reveal that all-pervading universal form that supports the universe. Thus, in chapter 11, Krishna proves himself as the Supreme Lord, and he establishes the criteria that anyone who claims to be God must also show a universal form. Krishna then reveals Krishna then reveals to Arjuna his wondrous, effulgent, all expansive form, and Arjuna sees all soldiers on both sides dying within it. Krishna explains his form as time, the destroyer of all world, and requests that Arjuna, knowing in advance the inevitable day of all the warriors, become his instrument. In answer to Arjuna's fearful prayers, Krishna first shows his four-arm form before again returning to his original two-arm form. Krishna then states that his two-arm form can only be seen by pure devotees, and such pure devotees working for Krishna, free from desiring fruitive activities, and who makes Krishna the sum goal of their lives, certainly comes to him. In chapter 12, Arjuna, after witnessing Krishna's awesome universal form, wishes to clarify his own position as a devotee, the highest worshipper of the Supreme. He thus asks whether worshipping Krishna through devotional service or worshipping the impersonal is superior. Krishna immediately responded, saying that one engages in his personal service is the topmost. One should therefore engage in Krishna's service and fix his mind slowly upon Krishna, and if that cannot be done, one should follow the rules and regulations of Bhakti Yoga, which purify one, so he is later able to do so. Krishna then describes other processes that eventually lead to his pure devotional service. Then qualities that endear a devotee to Krishna, which Krishna next mentions, such as equality in both happiness and distress, independence from the ordinary course of activities, satisfaction, and the faithful following of the path of devotional service, are also part of the process of worshipping Krishna in devotional service. Arjuna opens chapter 13 by inquiring about the field of activities and the knower of that field. Krishna answers that the conditional soul's body and that body's interactions within the material world are his limited field of activities. By understanding the difference between the body, the soul, and the super soul, and by following the process of knowledge, the soul can transcend the good and the bad he meets realize his eternal subordination to Krishna and attains the supreme destination. The 13th chapter clearly explains that by humbly developing knowledge, one can become free from the material entanglement. It is also explained that the living entity's entanglement within the material world due to his association with the modes of material nature. Chapter 13, verse number 20 to 22 is explained. And now in chapter 14, the Supreme Personality of Godhead in detail explains the three modes: goodness, passion and ignorance. Those forces that binds and controls all conditional souls within this world. A soul can, however, transcend these modes through devotional service. All other processes are contaminated by the modes. Thus, the limitation imposed by his field of activity can be overthrown and the soul can be revealed to the Brahman platform, the constitutional position of purity and happiness, a platform of which Krishna is the basis. As one must be detached from the modes and their results in order to be attached to the service of the Lord, Krishna describes in chapter 15 the process of freeing oneself from matter's grip. He begins by comparing the material world to a gigantic upside down banyan tree, invoking Arjuna to detach himself from it through surrender. Thus, the soul can end his transmigrations and return to him in the spiritual world. Although the foolish cannot understand that the soul transmigrates, quitting one body to obtain a new body based on his mind's desires, transcendentalists see this clearly. The foolish can learn to see properly by understanding that it is Krishna who is the splendor of the sun, moon and fire, as the one keeping the planet in orbit and making vegetables succulent. They can see Krishna as the fire of digestion, as the Paramatma in everyone's heart, as the giver of remembrance, knowledge and forgetfulness, and as the goal of the Vedas and the compiler of the Vedanta. Krishna then reveals that knowing him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engaging in his service is the ultimate purpose of the Vedanta and the most confidential part of the Vedas. In chapter 15, auspicious, elevating activities were described as part of the banyan tree. In chapter 16, after mentioning 26 godly qualities, Krishna explains the demoniac nature which degrades the soul through arrogant, ignorant and concited pursuit of sense gratification and power. Krishna explains the demoniac mentality as follows. The world is unreal and is produced only of sex desire. Taking shelter of lust, they think of sense gratification as the goal of life and scheme to illegally increase their wealth, while plotting to kill their competitor enemies. They think themselves powerful and happy, and they, surrounded by their relatives, use sacrifices and charity only to further increase their happiness. Perplexed by illusory anxieties built by self-complacency, impudency and wealth, and envying the supersoul within their own bodies and within the bodies of others, demons blaspheme real religion. These mischievous lowest among men are repeatedly cast by Krishna into demoniac species to gradually sink to the most abominable form of existence. Krishna ends the chapter by explaining that because lust, anger and greed are the beginnings of demoniac life, all sane men should therefore give them up and surrender or understand their duty through faithfully following the scriptures. Krishna has now concluded chapter 16 by clearly declaring that the ultimate difference between the divine and demoniac is that the divine follows the scriptures while the demons do not. In the beginning of chapter 17, Arjuna inquires more about those who don't follow scriptures but who worship according to their imagination. Krishna answers by describing how the combination of the modes of material nature that controls the particular person will dictate a person's faith, worship, eating, sacrifices, charities, and austerity. The chapter ends with Krishna explaining the syllable Om Tat Sat and how this syllable indicates that any sacrifice, austerities, or charity dictated by the modes and performed without devotional service is useless in this life and in the next. One should therefore strictly or directly take to Krishna's service in Krishna consciousness. The entire Bhagavad Gita is concluded in 17 chapters, and in the 18th chapter, Krishna reviews the knowledge already presented. In this chapter, Krishna concludes, as he has done throughout the Bhagavad Gita, that one should practice devotional service in Krishna consciousness. Since Arjuna's basic desire to renounce his duty of fighting was fear of sinful reaction, Krishna explains true renunciation and how to transcend sinful reactions through, number one, becoming renounced from the fruitive of activities. Number 2, abiding by the orders of the super soul. And number 3, worshipping the Lord through one's fruits of work by acting either as Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya or Shudra according to one's modes of nature. Each leads Arjuna to fight. Thus one can achieve the self-realized position of Brahmabhuta, and that position detaches from all material things. One can practice pure devotional service. Krishna can only be knowing or known. Krishna can only be known through surrendering to Him in devotional service, and by this direct process, free from karma or jnana, Arjuna should need not fear any sinful reactions. Under Krishna's protection, such a pure devotee will reach Krishna's loka. Krishna instructs Arjuna that he should surrender to the Supreme Lord within his heart and thus attain peace in his supreme eternal abode. The most confidential knowledge is then explained by Krishna, which is, become my devotee, always think of me, act for me, worship me, and offer all homages unto me. Surrender unto me alone. Do not fear sinful reactions. After hearing the instructions of Sri Krishna, Arjuna is fixed and ready to fight. Sanjay, after narrating this conversation to Dhritarashtra, ecstatically thinks of the wondrous two-arm form of Krishna and predicts victory for Arjuna, the supreme archer, for he is the surrendered to Krishna, the master of all mystic. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.